The thing that I love about the Wise Guys teams is that you guys have a knack for finding the most passionate founders. They know what they're doing, they believe in what they're doing, and nothing is going to stop them.
It is really intense, I have to say, but I really enjoy it because I feel every day I'm totally evolving in this program, and I see that I have so many weapons already.
It's challenging at times. We come with a strong background of doing a lot of things at once, but it's just amazing to be next to the teams, showing all the creativity you can to help them. So it's not something you have to deliver, it's very creative work, and that's what I'm very surprised that they really like it.
I think the best of the people part always. You already know everything, but here the borders are infinite, just so much things to learn.
One of them is the passion, and the other one is how much we care about each other. Among everything, we are a team that really likes to spend time with each other, and part of that is because we all share the mission.
Because I always had the feeling that this is the family that I have.
This is not a job, this is what we love to do. I think when you can mix that one, it's great. We just have to sometimes understand that hey, there is more people around us, that we have to put some time for them.
For us, it was mainly like a crash course startup MBA, basically, kind of. It's kind of like a bottle of good wine, kind of that keeps getting better all the time.
I mean, Wise Guys team is what keeps me energized through everyday life. When it's a family, I'm like an adopted startup wise girl.
I just remember one scene from the Tech Chill 2 months ago when you had the demo day with Swedbank. Nearly all the startups were nearly crying when they said goodbye to the mentors. They can really feel the energy, and I think culture beats everything. And I also see Wise Guys as an execution machine.
Yeah, and people ask that why do you do that? There is no money, and very many accelerators have failed after a year or two. I believe that if you really want to do it, if it's your vision, and then you just can't give up, and you will figure it out how it works.
And you have to pitch at the big stage, right?
Yes. My hands are already shaking.
It's too easy for us because this whole month stuff Wise Guys, every day we preaching, it's easy for us.
Now we are only going up, and only the sky is the limit.
This is love for what we do at the end of the day, and this is our life that we want to have.
I already know that when it's over, then I'm gonna cry.
3 minutes of station, now back to work.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us. And we are going to, this is the third series in our Wise Guys XR launch communication. So first was a call with our team where we explained the rules and terms of the program. The second was a call with founders where we have explored V-Side, Ready Player Me, and Immerse, and their stories. Those two alumni of Startup Wise Guys. And today we are going to talk about investments and industry perspective on that technology. And with that, I'm Andrey Lunev, venture partner at Startup Wise Guys, and I'm happy to welcome here in our conversation Asha Easton from Immerse UK, which is a knowledge transfer network in UK. So you guys working helping startups and enterprises to find each other with the solutions and basically educate the industry, acculturate them to immersive technologies. Petri Rajahalme from FOV Ventures. From Field of View Ventures. Petri.
That's you, right?
Yeah, that was me. Yes, before I switched the boat. And Dave Haynes from Field of View. So, guys, you have partnered recently to launch. We had a conversation about that XR-driven funds or actually Metaverse-driven funds. But you will have a chance to talk about that in a second. So, well, let's start from Asha. Could you probably elaborate a little bit on your work at Immerse UK? Please take it away.
Thanks, Andrey. Thanks for having me. So, Immerse UK is an innovation network that's part of a larger organization called Innovate UK KTN, and we work to help to join up the XR ecosystem across the UK. Our job is really to bridge the gap between the large corporates, startups, academics, and the government. So a lot of our work involves, helping startups to grow, working with academic partners and helping companies find talent and partnering them with researchers, helping companies to access research and development grant funding from the government to help with their R&D and anything across the board. So we work kind of regionally, nationally, and also internationally as well. And the work that we do feeds back into Innovate UK to help kind of determine and other parts of the government as well to determine policy around immersive tech, and also just to help shape R&D funding calls that come through. So that's a little bit about what we do. It's a very broad remit.
Yeah, so there are still things to research in that field. Dave, I'd like to pass the mic to you. So you recently launched Field of View Ventures and partnered with Petri. What made you choose this focus of the Metaverse and XR?
Yeah, thanks, Andrey, and thanks for having us here as well. Looking forward to getting some great questions. So FOV Ventures, we call it FOV Ventures, but it's short for Field of View, which I guess is kind of a technical kind of pun. But we are focused on what we define as the Metaverse. Now, while we were raising the fund, and we're a relatively new fund, we talked about XR, we talked about spatial computing, and then Q4 last year, I think Metaverse was on everyone's lips, and I think Metaverse paints kind of much broader canvas to kind of, for us to invest in. Now, obviously, a lot of people are kind of arguing about the definition of Metaverse. We're not going to kind of add a new definition here, but it's largely anything that's around digital merging with physical, anything around software becoming increasingly 3D and built in kind of real-time 3D engines. It's about our content and, both our consumer and enterprise applications becoming more immersive, and that could well be through augmented reality or through virtual reality, but it doesn't have to be. And it also touches upon elements of Web3 and then kind of leaning into crypto. So it's, it feels like we're investing in this kind of convergence of lots of different trends that have been happening for at least the last 5 years, and XR is a very big part of that, both over the last 5 years and going into the next 5 years. So we think Metaverse is a decade-long investment thesis. We're very excited to see what people are building in this space.
Before we move to Petri, just a quick question on Web3 and crypto. Recently I encountered Tokenomics often in startup decks. For me, it's really the term that sometimes confuses me, because instead of going through stages, startups trying to outline their cap table for the future in those we have 3% for the advisors, 3% for this. This is do you invest in that type of ventures, or you more in the classical VC game?
Yeah, so we're primarily an early stage equity investor. So we invest between 250 and 500k euros into companies, and that's usually as kind of a straightforward equity investment or some other form of equity instrument, like a convertible loan. A number of the companies that we have invested in are now thinking about launching tokens. That's kind of immediately or in the long term, but we typically invest into companies as equity first, and then if tokens make sense for their business, then we're happy to be supportive of that.
Okay, so Petri, how did you came into XR game? Could you probably talk what made you move into FOV Ventures? Like, what was your past experience that led to that?
Yeah, thanks, Andrey, and thanks for having me as well. So for me, everything started around end of 2015, probably. I was Business Finland, which is the Finnish governmental agency for innovation, which funds. I was mainly looking at startups, and most people know the success that Finland has had on the gaming side. So we started seeing a lot of voice and noise around VR and AR back in the end of 2015, and that was probably mainly due to the fact that kind of Unity is one of the, if you look at Finnish developers' CVs, Unity is probably right up there due to being involved in the gaming space for some reason, in some type of capacity. So we just wanted to kind of get a head start on the global VR scene. So I set up a 30 million euro program to set up and boost the birth of the ecosystem and help very early stage companies in their kind of formative stages. So that's probably 2016 when we set that up, a 3-year program, and I was running that until I moved on to Nordic XR Startups, which is a private venture where I was investing at a Nordic scale into VR and AR companies for the past couple of years before setting off to this venture with Dave.
And just to clarify again about your focus, do you invest globally, or you have some geographical boundaries in your strategy?
So FOV Ventures, our focus is clearly European founders.
Okay, and in terms of technologies, like going back to the metaverse, like what's in your opinion differentiates? And this is actually the question to everyone in the studio. Like, what differentiates the metaverse from, let's say, traditional VR, AR, or digital startups? Is there any trait that makes startup metaverse driven other than, I don't know?
Maybe I'll just elaborate a little bit on kind of our history when we were setting up FOV Ventures. So coming from a strong like VR and AR background with Dave, but we already from the early days we set up not to put up an XR exclusive fund, but we were seeing this convergence of technologies which was kind of driving us forward. And initially we were actually calling it spatial computing. So for us it was kind of XR plus the addition of, let's say, computer vision and machine learning plus AI plus fast connectivity, 5G, which on the AR side is a strong driver in the market anyways. So for us, it was just this kind of natural transition from XR purely to kind of these immersive technologies, and going from kind of a 2D world into a 3D world, and being able to take your computing from 2D to 3D kind of spatially wherever you are. And then going forward, it kind of started encapsulating more and more of these virtual worlds, still like 3D, but it could be browser based, so it doesn't have to be fully enclosed in VR. And then blockchain, obviously, as an underlying infrastructure and technology, is very, very interesting and an enabler to a lot of different ways to kind of build your startup or build your community. Just a quick note on kind of the tokenomics. Yes, we are seeing that as in a lot of decks as well. And to us, it's not about you having to have tokenomics, because we invest on the long term. We're not here to kind of maximize short-term profit through a token, but it does enable you to build out companies in a different way by kind of taking on your community and creating value into the business together with your community. So we see it as an essential part to some startups, not all startups.
And the term metaverse, like Facebook is obviously B2C company. Well, at least it seems like that. Do you think the metaverse adoption will happen first in the B2B or in B2C space? Dave, like, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I mean, again, I mean, I don't want to get too hung up on definitions because, you know, we'll go around in circles, but, you know, we, underneath the broader theme that we have, you know, enterprise is certainly a part of that. And when we talk about the enterprise metaverse, it's more if you hear someone like Jensen from NVIDIA or you listen to Satya Nadella talk about what their vision of the metaverse is, they're thinking more about spatial computing, they're thinking about OT, they're thinking about digital twins, this kind of merging of the digital and physical, which is probably very different to, you know, if you hear somebody else say it. So enterprise certainly is part of our thesis. And, you know, certainly if we were thinking about XR, enterprise has been, you know, the kind of the use case that a lot of startups have been able to build themselves on, right? So previously I was at HTC investing through ViveX. The majority of our portfolio was enterprise because that's where you could actually build a business. You were talking to customers who had budget to buy headsets versus speculating on a kind of an XR market where, you know, even 2 years ago, VR penetration was still very low. On the AR side, you know, AR, you know, was through mobile phones, but we weren't anywhere near AR headsets. So again, with AR, enterprise was a kind of fertile ground because you had a market of users that were being paid to wear HoloLens or, you know, smart glasses or had much higher value problems to solve. Like if you think about, you know, medical, military, construction, you know, all of these are places where, of course, it makes sense if you have to go out and buy a, you know, $2,000 AR headset, that's fine because you're solving a high value problem. So I think, you know, when a lot of people think about metaverse, they immediately think about consumer, but for us, you know, it's certainly part of our broader investment thesis.
Okay. Well, Asha, in your case, you are interacting with academics and governments as much as with startups and enterprises. Do you see there more or less clear understanding of the term metaverse, or among them, or you still need to educate them? Like, how does it go?
A clear understand, like at a government level, you mean?
Yeah.
No, that's something that I am actively trying to do. It's definitely not something I think that is widely understood. I think even just from Dave saying, like, we're not going to really clarify even today our definition here. I think says a lot. Even amongst like people in the industry, the definition isn't clear. And I think even, you know, if we want to separate the two and just say immersive technologies and metaverse, and in this instant, like I think there's still not a lot of clarity on what immersive technologies can do. So I think there's a lot of like education that's still necessary, and I think that's on many different levels, in government for sure, and I think also in the investing world as well. I think there's still a lot of people who are unclear about, and we have, you know, industry-specific investors like Dave and Petri who are experts and understand this stuff and where it's come from. But I think there's a lot of people who are interested but don't really understand what this technology does.
And can I just add, actually, because I know we have an audience of mostly founders. I think if you're founders, I mean, I just, one tip is just to not get hung up on it. I mean,
yeah.
You know, I see all these companies with great decks, and you know, they have 4 pages on why the metaverse is going to be big, why XR is big, and it's like, actually, that's kind of irrelevant. I mean, there is a lot of buzz about it, so you know, totally happy if you want to swap in a few buzzwords or drop a few out, like if that helps you to build momentum within your audience, that's fine. And you know, myself and Petri also do that when we speak to our investors, because it does show momentum in this whole space. But at the end of the day, what we're looking for as investors is like, does your problem solve? Does your startup solve a problem? And if that's using AR glasses, if it's using mobile, if it's using Unity versus it really doesn't matter. But yeah, obviously and likewise, I've seen a lot of companies that have just kind of switched their language, and you know, it just come off looking in you know, kind of inauthentic.
Yeah, and seen some, probably you guys have also seen this too, seen some terrible decks where people are promising the absolute world. You know, they're saying, you know, we're going to have this group and it's going to have, you know, 5 companies beneath it, and we're going to build every single aspect of the metaverse. And you know, we know that's not going to happen. First of all, like, you know, I've seen decks where they promise things and I'm like, that's going to take like 30 years if you could possibly do it. And I can just look at your team immediately and tell that you don't have the capacity to do that. So, you know know what you're trying to do, your go-to-market strategy. Like what are you really building first, and what are you going to go to market with first? Focus on that. And yeah, don't overpromise the world and that you are building the metaverse, because no one will believe that. Sorry to be blunt. But
so the spatial component, this is, let's say, critical for what we are discussing now. The position of things, where they position, whether it's physical things or digital things. So basically, for me, that falls into 3 components, like the space or environments. It could be digital and physical. Then objects in those environments that you can fill, and then the human aspect, whether you track humans in those and how they behave in those environments, or how they represented themselves beyond video or just photo image in those digital spaces. Like, do you see any of those components are more prevalent in terms of or has more potential to develop, to focus in developing your products, or it's equivalent, like the spaces, objects, and people and their representation in the metaverse? Is there anything among those 3 components would be more profitable in your opinion?
Petri?
Petri?
I don't know about profitability, but I mean, certainly what we've seen in the past 12 months and what we're still seeing in the short term, your digital representation is very, very interesting as an area. And it's not just, well, which avatar do I choose? It goes beyond that. It's different avatar platforms, Ready Player Me obviously being the standout example. But it's also like, how do you animate that avatar? Do you use different kind of motion capture technologies to animate your avatar? What does your avatar wear? Do you create that wearable yourself? Do you create accessories yourself? Or do you go to a marketplace? And could those be like built on top of like blockchain as NFTs? So that space is actually on the surface, you'd think, well, you're just going to pick an avatar and that's it. But actually the whole, how do you make those interoperable, or can you make those interoperable? How you go from different spaces, from different virtual worlds to others. That's been something that we've been looking at very, very closely and made several investments in that space.
Yeah, well, thanks for bringing up Ready Player Me. It's actually
Oh, we're losing Petri. I don't know about you guys. I think Petri's frozen.
No. Is it my internet breaking up?
You're good. We got you back. It's good.
Am I back? Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to note that Ready Player Me went through the program 5 years ago, and we're happy to have them among our portfolio companies and also as advisors to the startup in the program. Going
just
back,
one anecdote on that actually. So before I was at this fund and then HTC, I was actually at a fund called Seacamp. So we actually came to Tallinn in Estonia in 2015 maybe, and actually saw the Ready Player Me guys. They were still called Wolfprint, and I remember going through Tallinn airport and seeing they had this kind of egg where you had to photograph yourself, and I think there's two things that kind of really kind of sing out to me about that is, you know, they started their business in 2015. It's just 2022, but now they're, you know, completely smashing it. So that's been a kind of, people think it's an overnight success, but yeah, actually they've just shown exceptional resilience as a founding team to get to this point. And the second thing is, you know, market timing. You know, they had a great idea. You know, they were thinking about avatars. They were thinking about how do we get these digital twins of ourselves, but actually, you know, the timing was too early, and actually their original execution was wrong. They were going for very realistic avatars, where actually they're kind of, you know, they realized that with the technology they couldn't quite get realistic enough without it going in the uncanny valley, and a lot of people actually wanted these more kind of fantastical avatars. So I think that is one challenge in this industry, both as a founder, as an investor. You know, we're all kind of thinking about where the end state is, but it's picking the right customer, the right technology, the right kind of go-to-market strategy for the time of that market. Yeah. And unfortunately, in venture, sometimes being too early is as good as being wrong. So that's one of our jobs, is to really kind of understand where we can invest right now, and then help to kind of, you know, counsel our founders to approach it in the right kind of timing and in the right way.
Yeah, what I found, yeah. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say on that, you know, I've seen, you know, I won't name names, like some startups that were, you know, almost ready to even throw in the towel a little bit in the last like couple of years, and then a combination of the pandemic and, you know, the metaverse, you know, trend taking off that really like reboosted the XR space, and they managed to, you know, get more funding and keep going. And so I feel like it's been a shot in the arm in some ways for the industry.
Right. So basically, in the past, how I see those digital representations is it's sort of a messaging, like a constant message, because with your outfit you send some messages all the time, and when in the digital space you cannot adjust your avatar to different situations, and in one context you could be represented in a suit, while in other a carrot would be very appropriate, or a robot very appropriate representation of who you are and how you embody it in those spaces. I think it's it's very prominent space. However, like going back to the B2B spaces, like, and B2C spaces, I think what's important that Dave said before is that the startup solves the actual problem for the customer, and probably in B2B context, and I'm advocating for that because our focus as a program is rather B2B. It's easier to demonstrate ROI on your investments when you sell. Well, I mean, on your customers' investments into your in the startup's product, when you have all the utility that could be delivered by VR AR product. While for consumers, most of the time is it seems like a gimmick features that people are trying to sell. Like, how would you approach that validation if you're a startup? Like, how can you validate that your solution is actually serves the purpose or solves the problem? Is there any advice you can share with the founders on that?
Use your testing and iterate your product.
Right.
Yeah, I would maybe say, I mean, there's nothing different about doing that for an XR business than any other business. Some of the early ways you can validate, I mean, just literally putting up a page, running some ads, see if people click and, sign up for a trial. Even before you built a product, that's a very good way of, kind of validating whether your proposition works. But I think where it differs with XR is two things. One is I tend to find founders in the XR space get really caught up in the technology first. So they build out something that's technically possible. And you talk to them and it turns out they actually haven't been outside the building. They haven't run that small kind of landing page test, or they haven't gone to the first 10 customers or 10 people that might be customers. They're just like, oh, wow, look, we've got this technical solution. There's also a lot of businesses that are building like products and then figuring out how people can use them, which again, like it should be the other way around. I think the other challenge, which is specific to XR founders, is obviously it's harder to get your users to try your product once you built it, right? Because not everybody has headsets. So I guess a few things there. One is as investors, we like to see companies that are thinking about, if it makes sense, building for multiple platforms. It might be that you have a VR first experience, but you're also supporting people joining from, mobile or kind of tablet or PC. Or if you are going in and you're saying, well, look, this is a VR only product, you really need to think about a strategy for how you get your product into people's hands, because you might be able to sell your software product, but then you have to go to a procurement team or somebody who holds budget to then actually go and scale it from a 2-person proof of concept through to a 5,000 person deployment in a large organization. And certainly one of the challenges that I saw at HTC within enterprise is that as a founder, it feels like you've got signal, like you've been able to sell into kind of a 6-person innovation team, but actually, going from that innovation team, like they're trying to sell it into their organization and they might be struggling. And there's a number of factors why it might not be getting adopted. It could be, IT policies. It could be you haven't figured out your MDM strategy. It could be that they haven't figured out how to procure enough headsets, on the kind of the cost basis that they have. So yeah, there is a lot more challenges, I think, within enterprise, which I think founders really need to be prepared for. It's not an easy sale when you're selling anything to enterprise. When you're selling XR to enterprise, there is some added difficulties.
Right. And in terms of big players, because area was actually populated with big companies who working on very complex products like Google, Niantic, Facebook, Nvidia. Everybody offers something. Like recently, ByteDance acquired Pico, and then one of the deals that stood out for me is Niantic acquiring 8th Wall. Is there still? Do you see still the room for startups to pop up in the field?
Petri, for sure. There's always room for startups.
Go ahead, Asha.
Yeah. I mean, there's always room for startups and innovation, obviously, I think. But I think it's important to do your homework and understand the space because I often, I'm sure you guys see it too. You get a lot of people that are saying that they're doing it first when there's already a lot of people doing what they're trying to do. So I think doing your market research is super important in this space and understanding how far things have developed because, that's something I see a lot, actually.
Yeah, Petri? I think as with any technologies, of course, there's a place for innovation, and there's I think in XR specifically, there's room for the crazy founders who will try out what works well in VR and AR, where obviously there's enterprise innovation as well, or innovation within big corporations, but it's not to the same degree as a founder who has kind of a passion to solve a problem and hopefully a scalable problem. So I definitely don't see an issue there. And maybe going back to the previous question as well, the downfall for several teams in 2017, 2018 I mean, they were victims of timing because they were just going to come out with products that they developed for VR, but that was a PC VR only back in those days, and they weren't kind of able to benefit from standalone VR, which obviously made a huge difference. But those teams were just like building and building and building, and then coming out with a product at the end of 12 months and at the end of their runway, hoping that somebody would see the great product and in a week's time would invest. But like Asha said, just iterate and go and talk to your potential clients, and then that's where you'll see, like, the market will tell you if they're saying, well, Google's actually done that and that's fine for me, that's good enough, and then you can try to pivot away and try to find kind of your angle, which is different to what is already out there, or which could easily be done by the big companies.
Okay. Yeah, I see. In that sense, like, we have still a lot of the information probably to translate from 2D viewers or internet to the metaverse and position it over there. Like, the interoperability was a buzzword recently, again, with the link with Metaverse, and Dave said, like, to build for multiple platforms. But is it actually feasible for a early stage team to be cross-platform? Because it means that you need to have developers across the stack of multiple platforms, like you build for Apple, you build for Android, then you build for multiple headsets. Like, any advice how founders can approach that interoperability, or they just need to go for it and find their own recipe?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, that is a really good question, because obviously when you're very new, you don't have the resources to have a dev, or just doing user testing across those platforms is going to be kind of costly and timely. So yeah, I think there's no easy answer. I mean, there are kind of more and more tools being kind of put out there to help towards that end goal. I mean, I think when it comes to VR, I mean, hopefully, I think kind of almost as a starting point, if somebody can be going to kind of the lowest common denominator, like if you can have your application working on, on Quest, on Pico, on the Vive Focus Plus, I think, again, like, the industry needs to do a bit of help there as well, making it easier for developers, like with kind of OpenXR and things like that. It is now getting easier to build a standalone VR application and then target that across all the different devices. So that's probably the first thing, is just making sure that you can be on those lower end headsets, unless you're targeting something like kind of military, or where it really needs to be kind of high end. It must be on PC VR, but at that point you'll probably need to have a product that's selling for a much higher price to a lower number of users. But yeah, I still see a couple of XR companies just targeting PC VR, and it's just like, that's just not, it's going to be very slow process for that to get adopted. Then to go from VR into desktop doesn't seem too hard from a lot of the startups that I've spoken to, but I guess the one is then saying, well, hey, do we then actually have a downloadable mobile application, and how that would work? So yeah, I think that there's no one simple solution or answer to that, but I think any kind of CTO starting to build a product needs to think about that, and needs to have a good answer. Like, that's one of the questions we probably ask as standard, if we're doing more diligence on a company, is how do you think that strategy, how do you think that through? And you might not be doing it from day one, but we'd like to hear that you have a strategy of, yes, it makes sense, and this would be the next platform and the next platform, and vice versa. So
I think Workroom is a good benchmark
in terms of planning horizon
for everybody.
Go ahead, Petri.
Yeah, I think Workroom is a good benchmark. They really started out as a pure VR play, and just built with kind of what you can really, where you can maximize what VR has to offer. So they never compromised on kind of what VR has to offer when it comes to the product, but they just kind of built the community and got the users engaged, and then started branching out to other platforms. But what's cool about Workroom is that they never lost the kind of where they're coming from. They still have like, I don't know, 3 million users on VR. So that's kind of a good benchmark story for everybody to look at, where you can start out on one platform and still kind of build out on there, but then see where you can scope it out, scale it out as well after the first platform.
Yeah, and I think extending that into enterprise use cases. I mean, one great example would be Gravity Sketch, that actually many years ago they started. People don't know, Gravity Sketch is a kind of design tool for enterprise teams. And they actually started off at tablet. They started off before XR was even a thing. Then they moved into VR because it just makes most sense to be designing in VR. But then they realized that design teams have, they work in different modes. Like they might be kind of sketching stuff down where they don't want to be in a headset, or they're using like a Wacom tablet or something like that. Now they've got a really great cross-platform strategy where they were leading in with the VR sale, but actually now, they have a great desktop app. And I think one thing is to then recognize like kind of the different things, like even if your product is on one platform only, thinking about the workflows of those users as well, right? So it might be like, say, VR training, for example. So VR training, it makes so much sense. There's so much evidence that says that training is best done in VR, but at the same time, you need to think about integrating into, website CRMs, like which are going to be browsed in 2D. You need to think about the rest of the course materials where they might then take a test which is in 2D. So you really need to think about, yes, we might have XR as a medium, but what are all the different things that we're going to need to plug in across these different kind of modalities that we use the product for? So that's something when we talk to startups, we're always kind of probing them about that as well.
Do you believe that early stage startup well, let me put it other way around. Like, what is important for you when you evaluate your investments? Current product or the startup vision, or what are the main things that you look for in the startup?
Actually, it starts with the team. That's first and foremost, always, right. and then we look at the problem that they're trying to solve, and then we start like going into what's the product actually, and how does it fit into our view of the market, or our view of the markets where they are going.
Because again, I often see like, here is our roadmap. We are going to build this. We're going to enable this content. Then we are going to build a marketplace. And this is like 5 years ahead of problem. Like, what would be the right horizon for actual planning for early stage startup? How far they should envision the development? Asha? Do you want to
probably best Dave and Petri, because they're actually going to invest in people. But I mean, I would want to see, the first couple of years as what they focus on most in the pitch, and then if you're going to expand on like a bigger vision, keep it short and sweet. You don't need to elaborate so much on that part of it. I would prefer to see, as Petri said, the team, the product, the go-to-market with that particular thing that they are capable of building in the short and nearer term. And then see that they've thought through, as Dave said, like what's next, what's on the horizon, but not focus. Like some people go really heavy on that. And that's really not, I think, the best strategy.
Yeah, I think for us, there's different time horizons. First is the long-term vision. Like as an investor, and this will be for most like venture investors, it might differ for friends and families and angel investors. But for us, we need to know the long-term vision, because we need to know that the company will be able to kind of reach some sort of venture scale outcome. So for us, we look for companies where we think it could be at least a 300 million euro plus business. Most investors will say that they need $1 billion plus outcomes, but for us, we're happy to kind of see it slightly less. We're a smaller fund, and we think in this space we'll see quicker exits. But so that's number one, is like you need a founder that can, I don't want to just see a slide with lots of like, oh, here's who's going to buy us, because that's maybe a bit too short-term thinking, but understanding why and when the business can get really big. But then actually what we really then need to do is, we invest primarily at pre-seed and seed. So at pre-seed, we need to have confidence that the money you're raising and the vision you have is going to get you to the next 6 months, and then you're going to need to go back out and raise. So, we need to really understand what kind of milestones do you think you'll be able to hit within 6 months. If you're building an enterprise product, that probably means you need to have a fairly robust product, even if it's not feature complete. And you'll probably need to have maybe, 3 or 4 kind of, like POCs in development, or some type of, like 2 customers that have paid money and, you expect to get some sort of recurring income. If it's at seed, then we're usually expecting founders to go out and raise for at least 12 to 18 months of runway. So there it's more thinking about, well, what do you need to go and achieve in the 12 to 18 months? But we don't expect any of those companies to become suddenly profitable by the time our money runs out. So it's really thinking about, what's the story you're going to go and tell when you go out and raise your next round. And then it's really not until Series A when we expect a company to be thinking about, hey, we figured this out, now we just need money to go and scale the sales and marketing.
Okay, and Petri, how do you think, like, how acceleration program could support a startup?
I think the most critical part of an acceleration program is to try and cram it full of other startups, so peer-to-peer, cram it full of mentors, and just then it's up to the founder to kind of see who could fit your trajectory, who you could bounce off ideas off, and who has done it before, a mentor, for example, who can kind of share their insight into going to a market. It's kind of, at best, you can kind of already start to feel out what the product market fit would be. So also go out and talk to your potential customers or users as much as possible, and then come back with that feedback or that insight and talk to your peers or the mentors. Because at best you can kind of really find a clear path to your kind of North Star, but then also the very hands-on approach as to how you can execute on a plan to reach that goal.
Right. Okay, so it's peer-to-peer learning and access to customers, and probably some guidance in peeling off sharpen your focus as a startup.
Yeah, I think peer-to-peer shouldn't be underrated. As a specialist fund, that's probably going to be one of the strength of ours, maybe down the line, because we're talking to a lot of companies and investing in companies who can benefit from talking to each other and sharing learnings. So it should never be underrated what actually founders can teach each other as well, or just share knowledge or insight into something that they've done in the past.
Asha, you've been building community in UK, right? I mean, among those players. How do you see this community? Are the people open to support each other, or are they competitive? How does it
Honestly,
work?
massively. It's like one of the most beautiful parts about the XR community, actually. I think there's tons of support. People are always willing to help each other. I mean, even the thing that we're talking about, user testing, and how hard it is to kind of like get a group together to do that. People often are like rallying to help each other out with those kinds of things. through the pandemic, lots of us were spending lots of times and a lot of time in XR spaces, and the amount of times we got asked just to like, can you jump in a few hours so that we can like test if this is going to crash with so many people. People are always willing to help. It's a really great part about the community.
Dave, do you think it's safe to build products for other startups, like in the field of tools or?
Andrey, I think you're cutting out or frozen again. Can you repeat the question?
Often I see in the presentation that a startup builds the tool for another startup or another set of startups, or for the content creators, or like, do you think it's a safe strategy for the startup, like to identify the problems among people who are almost in the same boat?
Yeah, I mean, interesting question. I mean, as Petri said earlier, I think it's funny with FOV, we have a lot of portfolio companies that work with each other, so they're almost becoming each other's customers or their biggest allies. I mean, there is a lot of companies I see that are building tools to sell to developers, which I think is kind of tricky. That can be a limited market, but that really varies. I think one of the interesting things now is actually I do see some opportunities for startups to be built that are building off other ecosystems. This is less in enterprise, but if you look in consumer, like if you think about the amount of users and money flowing through the Roblox ecosystem or the Fortnite ecosystem, those are really huge markets where you can just build startups on top of that, just like we saw with the rise of platforms like YouTube. All of a sudden, YouTube hit a critical mass where you could go and build $1 billion business off the back of, YouTube's business, or, you could go and build a huge, company, just serving people selling on Amazon, or, a community of people on Shopify. I don't think we've quite seen that. I can't think of any analogies in the enterprise XR space, but I think. Yeah. So I'll leave my answer there, but maybe Asha or Petri can add on to that.
Petri?
Go ahead, Petri. Go ahead.
So, I mean, Y Combinator has made it work pretty well. They have a pretty good track record of going into YC, and then you have a huge number of clients already who's going to just buy in first thing, and that's, well, somebody could say that it's just going to crank up your valuation, but essentially it's going to serve your goal. But that's very hard. That's an isolated case of success. Otherwise, selling to developers, it's always just a very hard market to crack, as Dave mentioned, and what we've seen in the past as well. It almost serves better to do it freemium than try to charge from developers.
All right, let's take a look in the chat, which I was completely overlooked, which was left overlooked because I was looking in the private chat and was quiet. Now, actually, in comments we have a list of questions. So, Luis, could you probably start bringing up some questions? So, from our colleague, actually, Maria, how often do you come across XR investors? Do many funds see this as one of their core verticals? Asha?
Yeah, I would say it's becoming more like a bigger interest to funds. But I'd say when I first started with Immerse a few years ago, that it wasn't so common. Dave, correct me if I'm wrong. I know that when Dave was with 5X, that trying to grow an ecosystem of XR investors was also part of his remit at that time. And I think that there's definitely a lot more interest now. I think the Metaverse buzz has helped that. Everyone seems to be trying to figure out a strategy around it. So I think it's going to help the industry. But it's slow growing from my perspective. Dave, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there definitely are a few specialist funds. We have some as a fund, we're very collaborative and we love co-investing with some of those funds. But you've got people like Anorak and the Venture Reality Fund out in the US. Actually, one of the reasons why we set up the fund was we really didn't see many specialists in Europe. So, hopefully we can be that go-to for the European founders that they then may bridge to Europe later. But I think, specifically for enterprise, I actually think XR has become, it's almost like you don't need a specialist fund. It's more, it's, especially when you're raising a seed round, like, there's great funds like, 0.9 who are investing in kind of XR. Like you've got people like, well, I'm blanking now, but we did, I actually wrote a report when I was at 5X with Asha at Immerse UK, which we should drop the link into the chat if I can.
Yeah.
But we interviewed 50 investors, and the good news was, and this was back in 2021, early 2021, and all of those investors came back and there was a huge uplift in sentiment of investing in the space. And I think if you did that survey again, and obviously there's a lot of hype about this, but I think this has been borne out because of the buzz around Metaverse as well. I think you'll find there's even better sentiment there from more generalist investors who kind of see that this is, a really good time. And, a lot of them are looking more at the consumer market and they're reading about, 10 million quests being in market, and they're reading about, Facebook rebranding and investing all of this money into their efforts. But yeah, I think even for Enterprise XR, I think, now the sentiment is, way better than it was maybe 3 years ago. I have a couple of portfolio companies out raising, and they're able to talk to a much broader set of investors who, 3 years ago may have just kind of, turned them down immediately. It's not easy because it'll always come up as a question like, oh, are we ready for XR yet? Or what are the pains? But if you're a competent founder, then you should, that shouldn't be the only reason why someone isn't passing in your business today.
Yeah, while that report has been brought up, I actually went and did a little digging this morning to see where everybody's at. And actually 5 of our the main companies we profiled went on to raise significant amount of money since the report. And then we had a 21 to watch section as well of some smaller companies. And there's 6 of them that have gone on to raise further funding in the last year. And there's been a couple of acquisitions as well. So I think that's pretty decent, of a report of 31 companies. It's a great indicator. I didn't have time to go and check who all the investors were on the piece it raises, but that's the next thing that I will do. But I would, if you want to find out who's investing, I would go check out those companies and do some digging on who their investors were.
Well, just a quick comment. I would still I wouldn't say you should downplay the technology or downplay XR, but I'd still want to, again, reiterate that there's a lot of investors who are still in the game and who were investing in VR and AR in the early days and who got burnt, who still think that, well, it didn't work then, it's not going to work now. They're still bearish about VR. So again, just try to make it clear what the problem is and the solution that you're bringing to it. And then it's just a technology, it's just a medium to kind of solve that problem, XR. And that way you can kind of already mitigate the risk that on the other side, there's an investor who is not a fan of VR, but might see that, oh, this is actually a true problem and there's a solution, and the medium just happens to be VR.
Yeah, well, Luis, could you bring other comments from Athena Demos, which is about Metaverse as a lowercase world, which actually great summary to what you just said. And basically, it's a convergence of technologies that itself probably doesn't solve well, it solves some problems of how you represent the information in that 3D structured way. And then how would you analyze this information in terms of analysis of such information? Like the next comment from Sergey Mazuk was about, do you know any fancy cases about AI, which is actually analyzing the information in XR world? Like anything that's like to what extent AI is a part of XR and Metaverse?
Yeah, I can't think of any specific to marketing, so I'll be kind of interested to hear what Sergey is working on. Sounds like maybe he's doing something in that space. We've looked at a number of great companies that are using AI more for content generation. So taking 2D assets and like turning them into 3D assets, or even ones that are kind of able to kind of create kind of entire world or environment assets. I think one interesting trend is that because there is a lot of hype about the metaverse, and because places from Fortnite to Horizons from Meta, these are spaces where, I mean, certainly Mark Zuckerberg will be wanting all of these huge companies to be setting up their own presences in the metaverse, right? So the question is, how do you do that? How do you facilitate that? Do you need kind of AI-driven bots that are able to guide you around a space? How can you be using AI to do automatic discovery within the metaverse? Like, how do you say, go and take me all the spaces where I can browse clothes? Or, there's still a lot of kind of fundamental core problems that we haven't solved within the metaverse. And I think if we're expecting the metaverse to be this kind of increasingly expansive space, like, we'll have to have AI at some point to drive all of that. So yeah, we're super excited to see all these kind of like interesting new use cases where I think AI will be powered, but we'll be powering them. But yeah, don't know specifically of any marketing use cases. Asha, maybe you've seen.
Yeah, well.
No, I haven't either. To be honest, to be honest, no.
Well, I think the marketing per se is very, like, especially brands, they're metaverse native, because if you think of any like Horizon or I don't know, VR Chat, Rec Room, Engage, other platforms, those are like different spaces and places, or you can think of them like cities in that digital universe. And then some part of them will be shopping malls. But if you look back into the physical reality, and I've been traveling recently, a couple of weeks, so you see the same brands popping up across different countries. And yeah, like, how do you translate the brand values from one universe or metaverse, whatever you call it, like from one digital platform to another digital platform, and how you do facilitate that translation? That probably would be a good use case for AI in marketing in particularly. Well, to conclude, like, we spoke about potential, but another question from Maria, I think, is do you see harm in metaverse? Like, we started from the metaverse and we closing with the same term, like, but what is the, do you see any danger in that, in such convergence at scale? And basically, if you always, well, I mean, to the metaverse to work, it has to consolidate a lot of data and then to convert it in some digital assets. That means that we more and more diving into like the surveillance of those sensors. Well, at least this is my dystopian probably view of that future. What do you see here? Like, anything we can do to prevent malicious attempts in the metaverse?
I think considering these things, like, as you know, in the early days of the industry is a good thing. I think a lot of people are, and I'm hoping that this will help to like mitigate harm that we'd see in other areas of tech, like social media and manipulating people's data and stuff like that to drive them to manipulate them to make decisions. I'm hoping that, like, thinking about that stuff in advance will help stop that from happening with this the future of this technology. I mean, I am concerned about like the use of biometric data and what that means for being able to understand people on a much deeper level and manipulate their their movements. I think that the future of this, having the ability to understand like what data of yours is being captured and how it's being used, and having the opportunity to opt in and out is going to be very important. I think the more data you're collecting, obviously, the more risk there is for breaches of, and having that data taken. So anyone working on, privacy and, that's also an issue I've seen with corporates, like not being able to adopt the technology because, they already have, legacy frameworks for their, private data security, and this doesn't fit into that. And it can be a big gap really for companies. So I think anyone working on data security around this kind of stuff will be really important. But I don't think necessarily is like a massively harmful thing. It's coming. It's going to happen. Like how do we just work on preventing stuff from happening?
Yeah, that's a super, super important topic that Asha brought up, and it probably would merit another session or two or three in itself. What I read into Maria's question here is kind of, does it pose the word that, is it too buzzy? Like, does it pose like overinflated expectations when like talking about the metaverse and being a startup within the metaverse? To some extent, yes. Some investors might frown upon the metaverse and not see the potential of it. But from our perspective, for example, as a fund, it actually just sets the tone so that everybody's kind of on the same page and have some kind of expectation as to what is the topic today and what are we talking about. And then the metaverse, as we've discussed, as we started out, it has like so many definitions. Everybody has their own thoughts about it. So to me, it's just a good like discussion setter and mood setter as to where we are today and what do we talk about today, and then we dive into the actual context.
And just maybe one thing to add, which I don't think it's the answer to this question specifically, but it's very important to us as a fund. And I think if we do think that metaverse or spatial computing or whatever you want to call it, if we think this is the next computing platform, like we truly believe this is a very fundamental way and shift in the way that we go and play, the way we socialize, the way we do our work. And each time we've had one of these major shifts, that's a big shift in society, and there can be a lot of kind of positive outcomes, but we probably as a society don't do enough to think about the negative outcomes. No one was thinking about what are the negative outcomes of big social media platforms when they hit a scale. You just have investors that are thinking more about like, oh wow, well, what are all the upsides when we can connect those people at scale? So I think that no one has the answers now, but as an investment community, as in the founder community, I think we have an extra responsibility to start to think about some of those things, and then also kind of place that responsibility onto our portfolio companies. And then one really crucial part of that is, if this is a new platform that we're building, let's make sure that it's a diverse group of people that are building it. Like if we build the metaverse from the perspective of, a bunch of, kind of, 40-year-old kind of white men with certain kind of cultural values, then that's not really going to we need the metaverse to reflect back on kind of the society that we have today. So so we are actually kind of plug for Asha. She's been doing a lot of diversity initiatives within XR and within the metaverse, and that's certainly something as a fund that we want to see more of, is kind of a more diverse set of founders. So please come and pitch us if you're kind of thinking about doing something. Then we want to hear from you.
Well, that was a great summary, I think, for the metaverse as a space where we can remove the friction and breathe with data and exchange the data with each other to facilitate whatever we do in a positive way, and exchange our perspectives, not only by exchanging our explicit thoughts, text messages, but also by just being together in some digital space, being present in one way or another in that digital space. We saw this in social And yeah, Metaverse as another, like the next iteration of the social and the compute, next iteration of the computes, and it will be definitely, like the social component will be definitely important in that. Well, any final thoughts, Asha, Petri? I think Dave.
I feel like I shouldn't jump in again, but just to say, I mean, I would certainly encourage everyone to apply for Startup Wise Guys. As a fund, we'll certainly be working closely with these guys. We'd love to, like we'll be mentors with the program. And, for us, we think that, accelerator programs can really help polish teams and ideas and kind of accelerate the process of becoming investor ready. And then, success for us is certainly to find a couple of great companies to invest in from this, latest Wise Guys group of companies. And hopefully we won't miss out on them and, have to invest in them 7 years later, like we did with Ready Player Me.
Thank you so much, Dave. Yes, Startup Wise Guys, looking forward to work with newcomers in the space, with experts in the space, and help you to build a great company which is investable for investors like Dave, Petri, Asha, bringing to the customers, to the market, and helping grow your products. Well, thank you so much. And I think with that, I conclude and I'm thankful for the audience who joined us. And let's see each other offline and online in different platforms. And Luis, shall we see this great video about Startup Wise Guys once again?
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank
the thing that I love about the Wise Guys teams is that you guys have a knack for finding the most passionate founders. They know what they're doing, they believe in what they're doing, and nothing is going to stop them.
It is really intense, I have to say, but I really enjoy it because I feel every day I'm totally evolving in this program, and I see that I have so many weapons already.
It's challenging at times. We come with a strong background of doing a lot of things at once, but it's just amazing to be next to the teams, showing all the creativity you can to help them. So it's not something you have to deliver. It's very creative work, and that's what I'm very surprised that I really like it.
I think the best of the people part always. You already know everything, but here the borders are infinite. Just so much things to learn.
One of them is the passion, and the other one is how much we care about each other. Among everything, we are a team that really likes to spend time with each other, and part of that is because we all share the mission.
Because I always had a feeling that this is the family that I have.
This is not a job, this is what we love to do. I think when you can mix that one, it's great. We just have to sometimes understand that, hey, there is more people around us that we have to put some time for them.
For us, it was mainly like a crash course startup MBA, basically, kind of. It's kind of like a bottle of good wine, kind of that keeps getting better all the time.
I mean, Wise Guys team is what keeps me energized through everyday life. When I started working with the startup scene, Wise Guys was my kind of entryway, so I feel like it's a family. I'm like an adopted startup Wise girl.
I just remember one scene from the Tech Chill 2 months ago when you had the demo day with Swedbank. Nearly all the startups were nearly crying when they said goodbye to the mentors. They can really feel the energy, and I think culture beats everything. And I also see Wise Guys as an execution machine.
Yeah, and people ask why do you do that? There is no money, and very many accelerators have failed after a year or two. I believe that if you really want to do it, if it's your vision, and then you just can't give up, and you will figure it out how it works.
And you have to pitch at the big stage, right? Yes, yes. My hands are already shaking.
It's too easy for us because this whole month Startup Wise Guys, every day we preaching. It's easy for us.
Now we are only going up, and only the sky is the limit.
This is love for what we do at the end of the day, and this is our life that we want to have.
I already know that when it's over, then I'm gonna cry.
3 minutes of station, now back to work.